Hello and welcome, everyone. This is our third in a series of seminars on creative writing and neurodivergence. And today we have Sam Meekings in conversation with Louise Tondeur. Just letting some people in. So they're going to be in conversation about how the Academy can better serve neurodivergent writers, in particular through the lens of the social model of disability. And they'll discuss ableism in the world of creative writing, rejection, sensitivity, procrastination, and ways in which neurodiversity affects and informs Lou's creative process. So I'm going to introduce Sam, and then Sam will introduce Lou, and they'll have a conversation. And then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. If you have any questions, if you could put those in the chat, and we'll put those to our speakers toward the end. So Sam Meekings is Associate Professor of Creative Writing at Northwestern University, Qatar. He's the author of Under Fishbone Clouds and The Afterlives of Dr. Gachet, and is the co-editor of the Scholarship of Creative Writing Practice from Bloomsbury 2024. Welcome, Sam and Lou. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Lenia, and thank you, everyone, for showing up. Wonderful to have such a big audience interested in this topic today. Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce Lou tonight. So, Dr. Louise Tondeur is a freelance writer and creative writing lecturer, currently teaching part-time at the University of Brighton and the Open University. Lou is widely published in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, including academic work on writing practice, disability, and cultural theory. She's written 2 novels and a short story collection, with a second collection, Invisible, due in 2025, something for us all to keep our eyes out for. Lou got a diagnosis of dyslexia and dyspraxia in her 40s and has spoken widely about being a dyslexic writer. Lou has self-diagnosed as neurodivergent after being on a waiting list for assessment for several years. Inclusive practice is at the heart of her teaching. She believes that inclusion involves both staff and students. She lives near Brighton with her wife, her son, and their 2 black cats, and is a big fan of Golden Age, crime, Doctor Who, and Red Dwarf. Fantastic. So before we get into the questions and the interview, I'm going to hand over to Lou for a short exercise for you all.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for coming. It's lovely to see you all virtually. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat if you'd like to, and say what you're writing or where you're calling in from. I'm literally in the Academy right now. I'm sitting in the creative writing office at the University of Brighton. So I better not speak too loudly about how bad they are. No, I'm joking. The first thing I want you to do is to grab something to write with. So whether that's your phone or pen and paper, just do that quickly now if you don't have that already. And I thought it would make this a little bit interactive by getting you to write some things down. And of course, you can ignore me if you want to. You don't have to take part. But I think sometimes we think through writing. And certainly all my life, I've discovered that I think through writing, that I don't think first and then write it down. I think by writing. That's the way it comes out for me. And what I'd like you to do, first of all, is just jot some ideas down about the idea of the social model of disability. The social model of disability. What do you understand the social model of disability to be? So this doesn't have to be long sentences. It could be the words that come into your head when you hear social model of disability, like what occurs to you, what feelings come up. It could be sentences if you like. You could write down definition. Have a go at doing that now, because I think that's going to inform the rest of the discussion. But we spend, a couple of minutes on that, and then we'll get started with the questions. Is that okay, Sam?
Perfect.
Great. I think that's the 2 minutes up. Obviously, you could spend the whole day talking about this, but if you want to share what you've written down in the chat, please go ahead, or feel free to keep it to yourself. Sam?
Yeah, I was just waiting to see what popped up in the chat, and I will write down what I wrote as well. But my first question really is the lead-in from that. Really, I want to ask, why do you think the social model of disability is so helpful in understanding the issues surrounding how the Academy treats neurodivergent writers?
I'll talk about that in a personal way, if that's okay. I think it is okay, because part of creative writing practice is self-reflection, reflective practice, and to a certain extent autoethnography.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's okay to reflect personally. I think this is to do with being late diagnosed. I spent a lot of my life not knowing what was wrong with me. I thought there was something wrong with me, but I didn't know what it was. And so I looked around for answers, like, do I not belong because I'm queer? Because I'm disabled, in that I've always known I've had a hip issue, problems with my hip. I don't know how to describe it. I've always known that I was disabled in some way. So is that the reason I didn't fit in? Was it because I'm a parent? Was it because I looked a certain way? So I thought there's something wrong with me. And then it was actually a real relief getting the initial diagnosis of dyslexia, which was the first one, and sort of surprised during that diagnosis, dyspraxia as well, which hadn't occurred to me. I suddenly realized there wasn't anything wrong with me. And coming to terms with that, there was never anything wrong with me. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with you either, people who are listening to this. Coming to terms with that has meant coming to a radical understanding of the social model of disability, and how certain people are made to feel like they don't matter. And that affects the whole of society. It doesn't just affect the Academy, but there are certain structures within the Academy that perhaps exacerbate this idea that there's something wrong with us if we're neurodivergent. One of those is some of the policies and structures that have just been there for years and years, and nobody's ever challenged. So is that enough of an answer to that question?
Yeah, sure. But I'd be very interested to know, what your experience has been, coming kind of head first into some of those structures, and how you have kind of understood them, how you've navigated them. You're talking about, a lot of these rules and structures are so deeply ingrained that people think of them as normal. They become normalized. They're the status quo. So they in that sense, very hard to challenge, because people don't think about them, question them, consider them, because they've always been there. Has that been a challenge, kind of facing those or pushing back against those for you?
Yeah, I really struggle with this, because I don't think I have an answer to this. I'm still thinking about how it works. But the reason I struggle with it is because as a disabled person and as a queer person, I sometimes, often feel like it's not up to me to come up with the solution. That, okay, I'll use this word, which isn't a very nice one, but it's the one that comes to mind. If I'm going to be pathologized or treated as other, how am I also responsible for solving the problem by coming up with the solution? Having said that, the flip side of that is, because I'm in the situation, I can see some of the problems. So is there an opportunity for me to have some sort of dialogue where I can, where space can be opened up, where we can ask some of these questions of existing power structures generally, but also in the Academy? So I suppose one answer would be for us to create networks of staff who are neurodivergent and students who are neurodivergent, and put the question to them, what structures have you found difficult? What have you found difficult to navigate? We had one neurodivergent student, for instance, today talk to us about creative writing workshops and how they found creative writing workshops difficult to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're being challenged to make those more accessible. And this is in an institution where we feel like we've already put those provisions in place to a certain extent.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? It often comes back to this question of labor, I think, in a way that, work needs to be done, but it's, certainly unfair, division of labor to say to people, okay, well, you're neurodivergent. So one, I want you to take the time to educate me about this, about your experience and your needs. And two, I want you to fix the problem of these deeply ingrained structures. It's a huge ask and a huge amount of unfair labor, isn't it? So
yes, and I've had more than one person say to me, oh, of course you research neurodiversity. Like, that's not true at all, unless you count reading books about neurodiversity or neurodivergence. And I've had people, I've heard friends who've had the same, where they've come out as queer in an institution, and then they've been put down to teach queer theory because it's been assumed that they research in that area. But of course, they may well not be research. That's like calling me a vet because I own 2 cats. So,
yes.
And here I've been described as someone who does research into neurodivergence. I don't know if it's a masking thing or because I've learned to try and accommodate neurotypical people, but I'm always tempted to go, oh, all right, then I'll be a researcher into neurodivergence. But actually, when I think about myself and what I want to write. I want to be a writer. I'm not a researcher into neurodivergence. Why should I investigate that for myself? On the other hand, when I go to training sessions and the person in charge is okay, I'm making an assumption, but the person in charge is neurotypical, and they've made an assumption that everyone in the group is neurotypical, and they're training us in how to treat neurodivergent students. I get very, very annoyed by that. I want to have a say. So that almost puts me in the position of needing to be a researcher in order to have that say. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but it's also about, interrupting or disrupting people speaking on a subject that they maybe don't have the lived experience of. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my next question is really about that lived experience. You talked about, disability a little bit there. I want to know, what are your thoughts and experiences of ableism, not just in the academy, but, the wider world of creative writing communities, the world of publishing?
Yeah, I think this would be a really great moment just to get everybody to do the same activity again, but the same writing activity again around this word ableism. What words come into your head when you hear that word? If you're doing some note taking, do that again with the word ableism and share your thoughts in the chat. It's one of those words. I was once, when I was doing my PhD, asked to write an entry for a literary encyclopedia on the word lookism. Lookism. You probably all know what that is, but at the time, this is 20 years ago, I didn't know what lookism meant. So they'd commissioned me to write it and they were going to pay me, I don't know, £100 or something. So off I went and researched it. And when I first saw the word, I thought, oh, that isn't a thing. That's sort of a made up word. And then I started looking into it and realized this is really is a thing. It's really political. It's really important. And I felt really compelled to write political stuff in my entry. And I think you can still find it online somewhere. And I think ableism sometimes gets treated like that kind of a word, that it's not that it's like a second cousin to sexism and racism, that it doesn't really matter. And yet, I feel like my whole life has been affected by it. And I think in particular, because I was late diagnosed, I think there's a particular experience of being late diagnosed. It's about understanding yourself, reflecting on yourself and your life, and so I should say my life, my writing, and being able to understand myself. It was like an epiphany moment, suddenly realizing that this was a thing. So I think if I'd been diagnosed early, I would have had a different, not necessarily good, but different experience. But then there was a point for me when I looked back on my whole career, because I'm in my 50s now, looked back on my whole career and went, oh God, that and that and that. Like just not really realizing how I was feeling about something and not being given the space to understand how I was feeling about, say, for instance, my first novel being with a big publisher, and not really having the space to come to terms with it, and being surrounded by, and forgive me if anybody's Oxbridge here, but I'm not meaning to be derogatory, but during that experience, being surrounded by people who had been to Oxbridge and who perhaps had that particular experience of academia and had perhaps were rather privileged. And I was plunged into this kind of world that I knew nothing about. And had I known what I know now about neurodivergence, I would have looked after myself much more. I would have reached out for help much more. I perhaps would have said no more often. And I look back on my poor self, age 29, selling her first novel. And it feels like I was a fish being thrown to the sharks, which is a weird way to talk about publishing your first novel, because it should be a good thing. However, I'm so glad I had that experience, because it was part of my life and it's part of who I am now. So for me, ableism isn't this separate sort of academic word that doesn't really have an effect and is second cousin to the other isms. It's profoundly shaped my life, I think. And it's partly prevented me from having a career as a published writer, in terms of me publishing more novels with mainstream presses, I think. Partly because it affects what I write. So I tend to write about deviant things and deviant characters, and I use deviant plots and write in a fairly rebellious, anti-status quo sort of way that perhaps doesn't fit traditional plot structures. Partly because I didn't understand storytelling. The word natural is just awful in so many ways, but in a sort of storytelling didn't come naturally to me. I was just interested in playing around with words, messing around with words, and I didn't really see anything wrong with that. I just thought I wanted to do it. I know now that you can be dyslexic and hyperlexic, and that I probably am both of those things at once. And I was just really obsessed with playing with words, but that didn't really fit the publishing model that perhaps was expected or what people wanted. But to talk about it feels like it's sour grapes. I'm looking back on my life and going, well, I didn't manage to publish more than 2 novels with that big press, so therefore I failed. It sort of feels like I'm making excuses for it, but actually, I think it's more of a coming to terms with it. My short story collection is with a queer press and with a neurodivergent editor. We've been working together on editing the stories over the last few months. And negative me went along the road of, oh, it's only a queer press, so it's only a small press. But then I realized it was exactly what I wanted and what I needed. And I'm absolutely loving the experience of publishing this short story collection, and it is my true authentic self in those stories. And the editor wrote to me the other day, just texted me. I just wanted to say again how much I love this particular story. And honestly, he's the first person ever to get that story and to understand it. And I think it's something to do with being a neurodivergent writer working with a neurodivergent editor. That was a very long-winded way of answering a question about ableism. But I hope in the meantime, some people have come up with some more articulate definitions of it in the chat.
I think we're getting a lot of good stuff in the chat. Maybe we'll have a moment later on to go through and kind of engage and process it. But I just wanted to jump off one of the things you said there, because to me, it sounds like, maybe one of these connections between the kind of experience of academia and the experience of the world of publishing is ableism, but it's also this concept of you've got to play the game that you and I have talked about before, but you've got to play the game to be a successful published writer or to be a successful lecturer or whatever. But that very phrase is such a kind of neurotypical one, in the sense that it assumes everybody knows what the rules of the game are, and everybody knows how the game is played and what are the objectives of the game are and how you have goes at the game. And of course, those rules aren't obvious and they're all unwritten. And perhaps, as you point out, some of them can be picked up, especially if you have, an elite or Oxbridge education. You may be more privy to those rules than other people are. But for everyone else, those rules are just things you should know. But how do you access those? And it sounds like that's a kind of link in the kind of experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. You really hit the nail on the head about how to play the game and not knowing the rules of the game. It's funny, really, isn't it? Because that is a kind of ableism, but it's almost like an ableism that you wouldn't be able to see unless you'd experienced it. Yeah, it was exactly that. I didn't know how to play the rules of the game. I just seen in the chat someone says she graduated from Cambridge. I apologise for disparaging Oxbridge. But it was an experience I had about 30 years ago, so I hope you'll forgive me. So that thing about not knowing how to play the rules of the game, that applies to academia and to the publishing world. I don't know how to solve that problem, but also don't know if it's up to me to solve the problem. But actually, can I just turn that around and turn it into something a bit more positive and say that I like games and I like playing games with writing, and we can all play games with writing. We can all have fun by playing games with writing, and we can invent our own rules, and we don't have to stick to some sort of idea of there being rules over there that we don't know. We can invent them, and if we can develop the confidence to play around with words, that can work too.
Absolutely. I wanted to move from, these big worlds of academia and the publishing worlds to your own individual writing practice and your own individual kind of writing processes. In particular, issues like rejection sensitivity, procrastination, how they affect your kind of how you feel about writing or how you approach writing, how your relationship with your writing.
Yeah, well, I went to see ASD coach before COVID, I think about 2018. And she's the first person who started talking to me as if she just totally accepted that I was neurodivergent. In fact, she called me autistic right from the start. I didn't know if she's right or not. This is why I went to the doctor and asked for a diagnosis. So that was before COVID, like I said. So I've been on the waiting list for that for a while. People have said to me, like, why do you want a diagnosis? Like, what's the point? I kind of wanted a diagnosis in the same way that you go to the doctor and say, look, have I broken my leg or have I just sprained it? I wanted to know what bit of neurodivergence I fitted into. But I'm just going to have to walk around the room because the lights are on like an automated thing. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I wanted to know I literally wanted the doctor to go, well, I think you're not autistic, but you do have traits of ADHD, or like you've got this, but you haven't got that. But that's not how they do it. You almost have to prove that you are neurodivergent before they even put you on the list. And then it seems that if you're not prepared to pay for it, you can only get diagnosed with one thing at a time. So I'm still on the list. So during this process, I've been reading about it and getting information online, on social media, probably unreliable information. Who knows? Who knows if it would be reliable if it came from an official source? But one of the things that I discovered, as well as the hyperlexia thing, that totally bowled me over, that did, because so I've talked about being a dyslexic writer for a long time and spoken at the Dyslexic Writing Festival, and I've written about it and given workshops with other dyslexic writers. And one thing I never understood was, how come some people in the class or in the workshop or in the talk are as obsessed with writing as I am and like really into books and stories, yet they're dyslexic, whereas the rest of the people are having a hard time with it. I didn't understand how we could all be dyslexic. And then I realized that some of us were also hyperlexic, so also obsessed with books. Like I got that through an online connection, that information. And then the second epiphanic moment was understanding rejection sensitivity, gets called dysphoria. So I just call it that. No one officially, why would anyone officially talk to me about it? I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining a process where I go into a room, someone goes, you've got this and this. And in the next room, there's someone who'll officially talk to you about what you've got and what they can do about it. That's not going to happen. That didn't happen with my hips. It didn't happen with dyslexia. That's a fantasy, and I guess it's a fantasy some people think happens. But rejection sensitivity was one of those things where I went, oh my God, that has affected me my whole life, and I had no word for it. And I feel so much better now I have a word for this thing. So I still do, I guess, going into a sort of shutdown mode after getting any kind of perceived rejection or real rejection, hyper masking, if that's a thing, like masking a lot, trying to make out I was okay when I wasn't. This horrible pain that I thought I shouldn't be experiencing, but I was. Like, again, what's wrong with me? Does everyone experience rejection like this? And then it seemed around me there were other people who could just shrug off rejection. I'm talking about rejection generally, not just from publishers. Mm-hmm. This is another problem that I haven't solved, but just to say that just that self-awareness of knowing that it was a thing. I mean, I was brought up in an evangelical household. I am not evangelical anymore. But I felt like being evangelical about rejection sensitivity, dysphoria. I just wanted to go around handing out leaflets. This is a thing. Like, you have to know that this is a thing, and then you can get some help. Like, you give your heart to the Lord or whatever. No, scratch that. You can get some. You can find some resources that will help you. I think you've got to give yourself space. Deep breathing helps. Being around people who'll lift you up rather than put you down. Being around other writers who've also experienced rejection. I did a talk on publishing at a festival, how to get published, after I found out about this, and I talked about it. And one person came up to me afterwards. I have no idea if she was neurodivergent or not, but just said, "Thank you so much for sharing your story, because now I realize I'm not the only one who feels like this." And I think sometimes we can carry around a story in our head as writers that, you get published and then you get something else published, and then there's an upward trajectory that we get more and more published and more successful, and then at some point someone hands us a large check or something. And of course it's not like that. There are going to be knockbacks. You might not stay with the same agent forever. You might not stay with the same publisher forever. You might be successful 1 minute, or have a version of what we call success 1 minute, and then a version of perhaps what we call failure another minute, and there are going to be ups and downs. And so having a support group around you while you're going through that, and other people who've experienced it too, can really help. Another thing that really helped with that was realizing that writers who are incredibly successful, some of them wrote, say, 5-6 novels before they even got a publishing deal. Some of them sent their work out to hundreds of agents before one of them said yes. That sort of context really helps too. But I don't think I've never come to terms with the actual feeling of the physical feeling of it. I don't know how to come to terms with that. I would really like there to be some sort of answer to it. But I think the nearest answer for me is having a community, learning breathing, doing exercise, taking myself out of my head. So going swimming, for example, and then knowing that the feeling will pass. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. It made me think also, trajectory is one of those words I hate, really, because it assumes that, when we're, I don't know, 18 or 19, or some of us want to be writers from when we're, 4 or 5 or 6, right? That we have mapped out some kind of path and we think about how one book leads to another. And I haven't met a writer who works like that at all. And another word I dislike in writing terms is career. What does a writing career mean? I think most of us, we want to write, as you pointed out before, we want to spend as little time ideally getting distracted or pulled away from the kind of joy of writing. But also one of these other words I hate, I'm not going to take this over with a list of words I hate, but another word I hate is brand now, like ourselves as brand. And I think the more that people talk about the writerly self as a brand, the harder it is to talk about things like rejection and then rejection sensitivity, because we're supposed to pretend, or act like this is our brand, this is our identity, everything's going well. And if we get rejections, okay, don't talk about them too much, move on, or the next step or the next thing. And of course, so if nobody's really talking about it, then as you point out, there's no way to build that community or to share, no, this is happening to me too, or this is what I'm going through. And that's how you find out about these things, by people talking about them.
Yes, one thing that's really helped me has been being in a writing group. And I would urge writers to find like-minded writers that they can be in a writing group with, if it's at all possible, because that's really helped me. I've been in it for about 9 years now.
Oh, nice.
And it's just really useful to hear other people's stories about their frustrations with rejection and what we call a writing career and what it actually means.
Fantastic.
In terms of procrastination, I think I go into hyperfocus too much. So when I was writing my second novel, I would, forget to eat, drink, go to the loo. I'd be in my pajamas all day. I've had to temper the hyperfocus. I don't tend to procrastinate around my writing. I tend to procrastinate everything else. It's like not my writing that's the problem, it's the rest of my life. So I have to set alarms on my phone to remind me to do things. I use the Pomodoro technique, which is a tomato-shaped timer that you set for 25 minutes, which I really love. I have been using writing sprints, which is, I've been doing the ones organised by the people who wrote the book Written, Beck Evans and Chris Smith. Anyway, Beck Evans wrote Written, so you could look her up, but they're a married couple and they organise writing sprints. So you promise what you're going to do in advance, and then you turn up and write, and then you report back on how it goes. Don't know why this works, because it's basically you're talking to strangers on the internet, but somehow that accountability works for me. So yes. The last one I did was I said, right, I'm going to go swimming and I'm going to write 1,000 words for 3 days over a week. And it did help me to do the maths with the novel I'm writing at the moment, rather than being touchy-feely about, how do I feel about writing? It was more like, well, if I'm actually going to get this novel written, I'm going to have to write this number of words over this number of days. So how am I going to do that? And that helped me with that.
It comes back to the idea you talked about at the beginning. You know, we by writing things, we kind of learn and discover what we think. By saying them out loud, we kind of make them a little bit more real, and then they become things to which we have to become accountable, and things that we hold ourselves to. I mean, with this, you've really answered most of the question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway in case there's any more. But in what other ways does neurodiversity affect and inform your creative process?
Oh, I didn't realize it was right until quite recently.
Sure.
But because it's to do with being late diagnosed again. So I think I did an exercise where I think I was reading some kind of self-help book. I don't know if it was very good, but there was one exercise in it where you had to write down what you are really interested in and what you really love. And I started writing, well, I love writing. But for some reason, this exercise allowed me to delve a bit deeper. And I started to realize that the thing I loved was more specific than writing. It was doing something more deviant or more disruptive with my characters, like creating quirky, unusual, deviant characters and plot lines, and playing around with story in those terms too, which I think I mentioned before. And I think that is coming from being perhaps sometimes being perceived as other. So the opportunity as being perceived, when you're perceived as other, is that you get to stand on the outside and look in. So it was that. But it was also that I'm not bothered about playing around now, because no one told me what the rules are, as you said earlier. So I don't need to write a traditional plot and so-called traditional characters. I could if I wanted to, but I love the playing side. And I think that that's come from trying to come to terms with whatever this thing was that society was saying was making me slightly wrong, or that I didn't fit. And that then fed into my writing practice, but I didn't do it on purpose, I don't think. Or I might do now, but I don't think I was doing it on purpose before.
Yeah, makes a huge amount of sense. So interesting. Let's turn.
Sorry, go on.
No, you go on.
I was going to say that I think this is a final point, I think one of the ways that ableism might have affected me is to do with the idea of how I'm perceived in my immediate work environment. I tend to be treated as if I'm a teacher. I am a teacher, right? But my writing doesn't get treated as seriously, I suppose, in quotation marks. I suppose I forget to play the game in terms of bigging up my publications and saying that I am a writer and I've published this and this is where my work appears. I sort of treat that as if it's this secret habit still, and I forget to play the game in terms of sharing what that means. I recently got an email from here saying, we've put you down as not being an active researcher. We've categorized you as this. And I was like, oh, okay. I just ignored the email. And then I had my staff review, and the person doing the staff review with me a few months later said, you're more published than most of the people who have been put in for the REF in your area. Like, why are you down as a non-researcher? I was like, oh, I just thought I just sort of accepted it because I'm so used to accepting it. And that's me interacting with ableism in a way, I guess. Again, I don't think it was up to me to explain so much. But on the other hand, it was a kind of learned helplessness.
But it shouldn't always be down to you to have to fight and challenge the assumptions made about you by other people. Yeah, absolutely. We'll jump into the questions in just a second in the chat. So if you've got one, now is absolutely time to drop a question in the chat. But just bouncing off what you're saying now, I wanted to ask how, ableism, the ableism we're talking about, but also how your understanding of neurodiversity and late diagnosis and late understanding of this has affected how you perceive and how you think of success?
Okay, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, this plays into the whole rejection sensitivity thing again. And that I realized quite recently that there is a version of success that I'd held on to this fantasy version of success, which I don't even care about. I don't even want that, to do with writing a book a year and, making all my money from writing and, I don't know, having a beautiful desk with a beautiful mahogany table with a quill. I don't know what it was. There's some fancy version of success in my head, which when I actually looked around at what I have and decided, no, actually, I'm going to be grateful instead, I realized I've got so many of the things that I equate with success, like love, for example, not to sound too cheesy, like a book deal with an editor who I really connect with, like the chance to spend some time on my writing, even though it can be pressurized at certain times during the term, the chance to talk to people about writing. Now, I don't want to sound really Pollyanna-ish, but sometimes tapping into gratitude can really help with these false versions of success that somehow fill our heads. I mean, it's obvious why they're filling our heads, isn't it? Because something in society is putting them there.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Okay, let's jump to the chat. We've got a few questions building, so I'll try and go through them in chronological order. I think the first question was from Drykus, saying, just thinking about this, people say so-called smart people think with their right brain and artists think with their left brain. Where would you say does neurodivergence fit with this picture? Do you think it does fit with this picture?
Yeah, I think the idea of left brain, right brain, I don't know much about neuroscience, so forgive me if anybody is a neuroscientist. I think that that's fairly outdated now. I think that we all think with both sides of our brain. But I believe that they have put people, the doctors, the people out there, have put people in fMRI scanners who are dyslexic and have proved that our brains are wired differently. So the thoughts sort of have to go around maybe a longer route. But that could be why we're good at making unusual connections between things. I say I'm only speaking for myself, really, because all neurodivergent people are different, aren't they? But dyslexic people can be great at writing because they're great at connecting unusual concepts together. And apparently this route that our thoughts take can be a reason for that. But without knowing more about the science, I don't feel qualified to answer, I'm afraid.
Well, that's understandable. It makes a lot of sense. Question from Lisa. I think we got two here. I'll go for the first one first, obviously. This link to this Outside In organization website, description here. Outside In, it's a charity that supports artists who encounter significant barriers to the art world due to health, disability, social circumstances, or isolation. They provide a platform for artists to show their work, artist development, exhibitions, training, campaigning, lobbying. She's wondering, what have you or anyone else in the chat encountered in this vein that exists for writers, or is there any organization for neurodiverse writers? I'm wondering also, to tag on to Lisa's question, that you've come across.
Okay, so one thing I've done, and I am lucky living in Brighton, but I've tapped into local networks. So if you can find your local writing organisation, like the one down here is New Writing South in London, spread the word, and there are various ones around the country, then they should be able to tap into local networks. Conversely, if there's an organisation for autistic people, neurodivergent people in your area, they may have a writing group. So I actually think there's a lot of value in seeking out local level resources. The one that I know about at the moment for LGBTQ plus people who are neurodivergent is Beyond the Spectrum, and they're running writing workshops. And then there is a writer called Amanda, and I'm going to have to look up her surname, who runs training for neurodivergent writers online. I'm going to have to wave at the lights again, sorry. I'll look up Amanda's surname, find her website and post it in the chat if I can. So you've got that.
Interesting.
Just Beyond the Spectrum publicised the event. Thanks, Carol.
Yeah. That's good to know. Yeah, let's keep going. Another one from Lisa. Does the broad term of neurodivergent, well, I can't even say it today. Does the broad term of neurodivergence help or hinder? The accommodations I need and difficulties I encounter with ASD can be very different to those of my ADHD peers. Have you found this, the terminology, the language?
Yeah, terminology is really tricky, especially not being officially diagnosed. I find it really difficult, which is why I started using the more general term. Having done research myself, I think personally I fit into that overlap between ASD and ADHD. And apparently it's more common to have more than one diagnosis or more than one category that you fall into than just having one. Apparently that's more common. So yay. I think I fit into that. Where I've seen research on it, I feel like I fit into that overlap, which is why I tend to use that term, but it's not going to be the right term for everybody. And I don't know. I don't know if there's an answer for everyone on that one. I think we have to use the terminology that helps us the most. It gets us the best support that we can, depending on the situation that we're in. And there are some situations where I wouldn't come out as queer. There are some situations where I wouldn't tell people I have a physical disability, and there are some where I wouldn't use the term neurodivergent just to protect myself.
Talking about, getting that support we all need, Carol asks, what kind of writing group did you find, Lou? What aspect of the group supports you well for writing?
I went to my local writing organisation, so New Writing South, and they run groups for writers. We're no longer associated with them really, but we kind of evolved beyond it. But that would be a good place to start. What I found was we were all at the same level of writing, and I think that's really important, whether you're just starting out or whether you've had a bit published. We're all sort of a similar level. That really, really helped because we'd had similar experiences. What helps the most now is we do give feedback on each other's work, which is great. I think what helps the most is hearing other people's stories about their publication successes or what's gone wrong, what's been challenging, and being there to support each other.
Yeah, for kind of being there on each other's kind of journeys, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah.
This next one is in part a question, but also a kind of useful thing to share from Naomi Foyle.
Hi, Naomi.
Camptown, yeah, saying it's lovely to see you again. Thanks for the great talk, which covers so many of the themes I find relevant to my experience as an autistic writer and academic. She said, I've just joined a relatively new neurodivergent staff network at the University of Chichester. I'm wondering if there's something similar at the University of Brighton. That's a question.
Yes, there was. There was. And I think these are very good things to have. It's just having the time to tap into them, isn't it? When we're all under pressure. But there is one here, but I think I might have to restart it because I think it's sort of fizzled out a bit. But if anyone is dialing in from Brighton, please get in touch.
Well, absolutely. And also,
together.
Yeah. And also, Naomi's saying here, our network's looking to connect with other universities. So anyone here tonight wanting to, join in or who's in such groups and wants to join those groups to this bigger network, feel free to email Naomi. And her email address is there. Marshall mentions there's one at Falmouth. He's the member, and Naomi mentioned again, thinking of a conference. Sounds super interesting. Going to keep my eyes open for that. Another question
I think one of the things that's affected me is being super suspicious of making connections with people. I find it really hard. It's a self-protective thing because I've been hurt in the past. And not to get too overly personal, but I think it does affect your writing because then it can, make you reluctant to reach out to other people. So I think my brain does, this might be an ADHD thing, I don't know. My brain does this thing of completely forgetting to do the thing that's hurt me in the past. So I completely forget to reach out to people. I think that is, I don't know what kind of trait it is a thing. And I think I've suffered as a result of not reaching out to other neurodivergent people as a result, ironically, of this sort of symptom of protecting myself from the results of being neurodivergent in this society. You see what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that kind of caution makes a lot of sense then, doesn't it? Carol asks, what aspects of your writing have changed since your diagnosis, your self-diagnosis, your discovery of this world? Diversity?
It's a hard one. I'm not sure that my writing has actually changed, apart from I feel like I've recently given up trying to fit into other people's boxes. But it's funny because I maybe the thing that's changed is I stopped the negative self-talk because I like writing short stories, and yet there's something in my head going, you shouldn't write short stories, you should be writing a novel. Where did that voice come from? And also Tobias Wolff's famous short story writer, and says something about short stories have to be perfect. They're like the perfect form. You can't have a comma wrong. Every word has to be right. And I think I somehow took that on and thought that my stories had to be perfect. Of course, they don't have to be perfect. So I think what I've learned is to write imperfectly, but to keep doing it.
I think that's a nice lesson for everyone, really, to write imperfectly and to keep doing it, to keep going. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, on that, the kind of writing life, another question from Dreykus. I've read you don't need a PhD to be a writer. Most writers struggle with that, thinking you must be qualified in order to write good. Exercise is good, really helps your creativity come out. Would you say a degree would help you as a writer, or is attending courses good to improve your skills? What's your feeling about qualifications, I suppose?
No, you don't need a PhD to be a writer. Absolutely not. In fact, your PhD could take you away from being a writer, like mine did. I didn't do a PhD in creative writing. No, definitely not. You do one if you want to, but definitely not. My MA in creative writing helped me get my first book published. It gave me a structure. It gave me some space in which to work. I found that really useful. It was a long time ago now. I could have got that space a different way. So it's not so it was the space that was beneficial rather than qualification, I would say. You don't need a qualification to be able to write. If you've got a bit of money, or you can get some funding somehow, going on an Arvon Foundation course could be a good way of starting off. We're again tapping into local resources, local courses. Perhaps finding a local autistic organisation like advocacy group or neurodivergent group and asking them to bring a writer in to do some workshops. That would be one way round doing that. So no qualifications required.
I just want to piggyback off that and say, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, just to re-emphasize those points. And Lisa's replied in the chat as well and mentioned, the degree is absolutely not necessary, but one thing they give you is a ready-made peer group of fellow writers that are invaluable. My personal feeling, just to throw this into the mix is that was, for me, the most valuable thing about the MA I did in creative writing, that peer group. But as Lou's mentioned, that community is so important. There are many places we can find that. An MA, a qualification is certainly where you'll find that, but there are many other community groups as well. And I think, that for me was the most beneficial thing, that group of other people invested in writing, excited about writing, wanting to talk about writing all the time and the nitty gritty of it. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really wonderful discussion. I want to thank you very much for these really, interesting and personal and reflective answers to these questions. I think so interesting. And I think so many of us have been through some aspects of this and not considered some other aspects of it. And so it's really wonderful to hear from you. And so on behalf of everybody, I'd like to say, thank you very much.
Well, thanks for inviting me to do it. And it's, again, lovely to see you all here virtually. And good luck with your writing, everybody. I couldn't find the name of that person that I promised you, Amanda, somebody who runs writing workshops for neurodivergent writers. But if I find it, I'll follow up with Lania and Sam. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Before you rush off, let me just hand over to Lania to tell you a little bit about, the next steps from these events.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. And Lou, thank you so much. Boy, just listening to this conversation between the two of you, just fantastic. Lou, you have so much insight into writing, into neurodivergence and your own experience, but also granting that space for other people and their experiences. Thank you so much for sharing. This has just been wonderful. So next up, Sam and Marshall and I and some of my OU colleagues are planning a conference online and in London this summer, June 19th, 20th, and 21st. And so this series has been Creative Writing and Neurodivergence, and the conference will be Creative Arts, Creativity, and Neurodivergence. So we're opening it up. And we're working on the schedule now. We've got some fantastic proposals that we're going through at the moment. So I have posted a link to that in the chat if anyone's interested. And just to say, we're recording, and the recordings will be made available through the Institute for English Studies. And either they or I will be in touch to let you know when these recordings of these online seminars will be available. And it's just been fantastic. Marshall, I see you up there. Thank you so much for your first conversation with Lynn and Craig. And I had a conversation with Jane Byrne, and here tonight we're having this conversation with Sam and Lou. And these just feel so important and so timely. And I'm just so grateful for everyone who has joined us. And we hope to see you this summer. It would be fantastic. Thanks, everyone.